After the massive success of both Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise, it makes sense that Capcom would do whatever it can to welcome that wider audience into the next frontier. That's exactly what Monster Hunter Wilds does, smoothing out the already excellent process of turning big scary dragons into silly little hats to be faster, more flexible, and less fiddly than ever before. The other side of those dual blades, however, is that Wilds is light on any real challenge, even for what I'd expect at launch, never asking me to think hard about my equipment. But while the monsters may not pose much of a threat this time around, smart tweaks to combat still mean the act of carving them up has rarely felt better. My first surprise in Wilds was that the campaign isn't just a totally forgettable excuse to kill anything that crosses your path this time. Okay, it's still mostly that as you explore yet another uncharted land to solve some mystery, but while the story itself isn't particularly fresh, the difference here is that the characters within it are actually pretty great. Whether it's the excitable engineer Gemma,
We are so gonna talk later, pal.
your empathetic handler Alma,
Oh, but I've definitely heard of him.
or the total space cadet of a biologist Eric,
This forest is amazing.
your team is full of likable personalities and little character arcs throughout the gorgeously animated cutscenes.
See? Told you they'd be fine.
And that was enough to get me more invested. The revamped structure of Wilds also means that campaign is significantly shorter than I was expecting. I reached the credits in just 15 hours and didn't have to fight a single monster twice in that time, getting enough materials from any initial encounters to keep my gear up to snuff and jump right from one mission to the next. When you compare that to the 40 plus hours it took to see the end of the story in World, it feels like the intent is to allow more people to quote-unquote beat Wilds. And I certainly appreciate how that shift toward approachability might appeal to anyone who has been traditionally intimidated by the series. But as a veteran, I can't help but be a little disappointed that I literally didn't get knocked out once in that entire time. There's never a skill or armor testing wall of a monster that forced me to really consider my equipment choices more deeply in order to earn the reward of a hard-fought victory. Avoiding spoilers, there is, of course, more to do once you get past the credits. That's where the larger changes Wilds makes to the traditional Monster Hunter loop really start to shine. Gone are the days of returning to a separate town between every hunt, then going down the same checklist of tasks before you're ready for the next one. Pretty much everything you need is out in the field with you, and you're never more than a lickety-split loading screen away from whichever beautiful area you want to be in. Convenient adjustments are all over the place, like food buffs being tied to a timer now that sticks around between hunts. It doesn't even tick down while in camp, making a previously repetitive process substantially smoother without removing the depth it added to hunts.
Nothing like home cooking.
The roaringly successful result of those changes is that a vast majority of the friction past games could produce as you start and stop and restart between every encounter has been removed. Now you can just check your map for monster information and go hunt. The monsters you'll face are also generally excellent. That could be a flashy newcomer like the flamenco-inspired Lalabarina, or Wild's headliner Arkveld and its chain-like appendages. But the true stunner has to be New Udra. The tentacles of Monster Hunter's first octopus-like creature can be as unpredictable to contend with as you might expect, especially when they're literally on fire. And the satisfaction of severing every single one of them over the course of a hunt is second to none. The appeal of Monster Hunter's fights has always been how it empowers you with flashy moves and hard-hitting attacks. But knowing when to strike and where to stand and how the monster will behave next is just as important as figuring out which buttons to press. That's true in Wilds too, but combat is also more flexible and forgiving here. For example, you can adjust your footing a little more mid-combo, resulting in fewer moments where a mistimed attack with a long animation had me embarrassingly slicing at the air. In many ways, the combat feels like it's all about the new wound system this time. Wounds open up once you deal enough damage to a given body part, and then you'll deal extra damage when attacking them. But deal enough damage to a wound and it'll break, resetting that spot. Every weapon also has a simple to execute focus strike that will deal a burst of damage to a wound and break it right away. So maximizing the amount of time you leave one open and then using that finisher before it closes naturally is an interesting subgame to manage. Or at least it would be if Wilds ever presented me with a challenge that pushed me to make those considerations. Whether I was playing online or solo, I've never had a mission reach the 20-minute mark, and I've only fainted 2 times total across dozens of hours. Compare that to World, which had real tests like Kieran, who smacked me silly my first couple of attempts, forcing me to regroup and craft an armor set around thunder resistance, and it's hard not to feel like Capcom's desire to make this a more inviting Monster Hunter sanded off some of the bumps I actually enjoyed in terms of overcoming big threats. Things do ramp up a little bit in the post-game, but even there I only really had to worry about upgrading my armor or falling behind in damage once or twice during the content that's available at launch. After the 15 hours it took me to beat the campaign, I only had to spend another 15 to finish every side quest that wasn't about catching fish, and just 5 more after that before I had the best armor set and weapon I could get and a pretty solid suite of skill-boosting decorations. To be fair, I still have plenty more equipment I could grind for, but my usual desire to get the top-tier weapon of each elemental type and put together specialized outfits for certain challenging fights just isn't here this time, because those fights aren't here either. I think a lot of this comes down to raw numbers that could hypothetically be tweaked in one of the many patches that are sure to come, but some of what makes things so easy also seems to be baked into the bones of Wilds. For example, nearly every time you focus strike a wound, the monster gets locked into a little stagger animation, and you'll be breaking wounds a lot. Meanwhile, on the crafting side of things, my hunt for the best armor was way shorter than I ever expected because materials that are usually super rare can sometimes show up as guaranteed rewards when looking at the monster list on your map. That was excitingly convenient initially, but it's also what brought that loot chase to an almost trivially fast end.
Perfection.
I imagine this difficulty tuning will get a lot more people through the front door, but it also means that where my past 3 Monster Hunter reviews wrapped up around the 50 to 60 hour mark while I still had plenty more I was excited to do, I started losing steam with Wilds before I even hit 40. Don't get me wrong, that's still a healthy chunk of game, and it has absolutely been some of the most fun I've had with the series. I'm also sure any longtime fans will be thinking, well, we just have to wait for updates or G-Rank or whatever for the real challenge. But in that regard, Capcom's own roadmap has left me wary. There's only 1 monster scheduled to be added for all of spring, and then only 1 currently listed for summer. In contrast, Rise also felt slight at launch, but got 6 new monsters just 1 month later, and then 3 more a month after that. Wilds already feels like it needs endgame threats like its formidable Elder Dragons to really push its limits. And if it instead only gets 1 returning monster in the first 3 or so months after launch, this could be a long wait until its inevitable expansion. That all said, Wilds deserves credit for being what has got to be one of the most customizable games I have ever played. There's a huge host of accessibility features. You can adjust the size of or turn off individual elements on your UI, you have more control than ever over your menus and radio wheels, and you can alter the look of stuff like your mount, chat stickers, and even fast travel tents to a surprising degree. As a crowning touch, you can finally wear any version of each armor set too, essentially doubling the cosmetic options previously available as you get into the all-important fashion side of things towards the end. Partying up online has also been made more robust, letting you run around each map with your friends and seamlessly flow from hunt to hunt without having to regroup at camp between each mission. And even if you're largely planning to play solo, there are quality of life changes here for you too. That could be the surprisingly competent AI support hunters that fill empty spots in your party when you fire an SOS flare, but also the inclusion of an online single-player option that lets you fire flares to get help, but still pause the action entirely before you do. Monster Hunter Wilds continues to smooth off the rougher corners of the series in smart ways, reducing as much friction as possible that could get in the way of you grabbing any of its exceptionally fun weapons and planting them firmly in a monster's hide. But in that quest to make Monster Hunter more approachable, Wilds is sliced a little too close to the bone in some places, trimming its challenge back so much that I barely needed to engage with its in-depth equipment system at all this time to become an apex predator. Its more flexible combat is still some of the most fun I've had with the series, but like the blustering lightning storms of its gorgeous desert, It burns brightly but briefly until Capcom unleashes some real endgame beasts to challenge us. For more, check out our reviews of Avowed or Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii.